Okay, thank you very much. I'm Sebastian, and I'm going to present reproducible open science with EGI Replay. This is the structure of the talk. I'll give 3 parts. The first one, I'm going to present an almost reproducible paper as an example of how to achieve reproducibility with EGI Replay. Then I'm going to explain how to use EGI Replay for your own research project. And then I'll briefly discuss what communities are already using the EGI Replay service. By the way, there is a Q&A schedule at the end, but I think I will keep it informal. If you have any questions, raise your hand, interrupt me, we can discuss, no problem. I hope to take about 20-something minutes, so it's going to be shorter than expected, I guess. Okay, let's then go ahead and discuss the almost reproducible paper. So imagine for a second that I'm an astronomer and I get by a colleague shared with me this DOI about the paper that they find interesting. So I click on the DOI, that takes me to the journal and the paper actually, and say that I want to read the PDF. So again, I'm not an astronomer, but I was helping astronomers to work on this experiment, and I was helping on the computational side, of course. But just I'll give a kind of a very brief, high-level introduction to the background of the paper. And the paper is studying compact groups of galaxies. In particular, Higgson 16 is a specific type of compact group. These compact groups are groups of 4 or more galaxies, where galaxies are very nearby to each other, but every group is very distant from each other. And in particular, the paper is looking at the clouds of hydrogen gas in the compact group as a proxy to characterize the evolutionary stage of the galaxy group. Okay, this is all the astronomy that you hear from me now. If you have more interest, please go through the paper. And so I was contacted by Mike Jones, the main author of the paper, and he came up with a very nice idea for this paper. He said, I'd like to write a Jupyter notebook per figure, so I can share with my colleagues how each of the figures in the paper, how they are built from scratch. So everybody can see the steps to build the figure. So I thought it was a very cool idea, and I was working with Mike to achieve this. So if you look in the paper for GitHub, it'll take you to a GitHub repository where all the code for the paper is uploaded. And okay, this is the kind of the first step to achieve reproducibility. You have the paper, it's linking to the code repository. All the code is open source. So that's kind of the first step. Good, but then if you may have found this issue where you have the source code available, but you try to download it and install it, and it's complicated to get it working, right? So as a second step, what we did was to create a conda environment file, and this is a YAML file. This is the conda environment file, and you see there is in this YAML file we give a name to the environment that we're going to create. We specify the conda channels. This is the channels to download the software packages. And then we provide the list of dependencies for the environment. And not only the list of dependencies, but also the actual version of the software that we need to recreate this software environment for the code to work properly. Okay, so then with this, we also created this README file in the repository, giving instructions for people on how to download the environment file, how to install it. And actually, you see the first step here is explaining to people how to run the pipeline for the data reduction done in the paper. But actually, I'm going to focus on these 2 other steps, offering the user the possibility to reproduce the figures on the paper. And there are 2 options here. The option 3 is where you can download everything, again, on your computer and install it using the conda environment that we see. And this should work for a lot of people, but still it may be a problem for other people to recreate exactly the same environment due to operating system dependencies and other issues. So going a step further, to make it even easier, we consider using MyBinder or EGI Replay, which are basically two different names for the same technology. And with this, what you offer the end user is a link, and they only need to open this link on a web browser. And in this web browser, they'll build a clean environment from scratch with the conda environment that you specify in the repository. And we think this is the closest that you can get to a reproducible environment. So you can basically run exactly the same thing on the computer of the people writing the software and the computer of the people trying to actually rerun it, right? So with that, when you use MyBinder or EGI Replay, you get a link and you get this badge pointing you to the service. So that's what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna follow the link to EGI Replay. I need to log in to the service with my EGI check-in account. And once I log in, let me see. Okay, so it's now looking to build the repository, the Docker container with the conda environment. It was already built because I was doing testing this morning. So because it's already built, it doesn't build it from scratch. It just reuses what is there. And if not, it will take about 10 minutes or so to build the environment from scratch. But then either you build it from scratch or you just reuse what's been already built earlier. In the end, what you get is a container with the conda environment and the specific software that you need to run the software. So with this, I'm now presented with a Jupyter Lab interface. On the left, you see this is a copy with all the files in the GitHub repository. And in particular, we are trying to reproduce one of the images in the paper. In particular, I'll focus on figure 1. Figure 1 is the one presenting the Higgson 16 group with 4 galaxies, A, B, C, and D. So I'll go to Jupyter Lab. This is inside the plot scripts. You see there is a notebook per figure. I open the figure 1 notebook and I click on Run All. I think Jupyter Notebooks are pretty famous these days, so no need to present them in detail, but basically here you can combine code snippets with text and also with images, and that's why it's so convenient. But basically you are building the image and explaining how you build the image. And then in the end, you see you get the same image as in the paper. Well, so it is pretty cool because you have the code, you can build it from scratch, but not only you can see all the steps in detail, you can also play around. And this is just an example of what you can do, but basically say that for Higgson 16D, I want to change the color label from yellow to red. So I just change the color and I rerun the cell, and then you get the same picture, but instead you get this in red color. And then you can also get, for example, the PDF image, and that's what you use then inside your paper, right? So again, this is the kind of the simplest example, but I think you can see the potential that for more complex figures in the paper, you can also do the same. So your colleagues can understand how you build the images from scratch. And I think we can also apply the same principle, not only to figures, but also to more complex results, right? And that's kind of the main goal of what we want to achieve with this. We think this is a great way of achieving reproducibility. So going back to the slides, as I mentioned, the last result is that you get with the service, you get the badge with a link, and you put it on your repository on GitHub, and off you go. Everybody happy. So the next part is to explain how I do this or how we did this. But are there any questions so far, or should I continue? I think there are no questions, so then I move on. Good. So how can you do that? So if you want to use EGI Replay, first thing to do is to get an EGI check-in account, and we'll share the recording, but also the slides with the links to the documentation. So this is the link to get an EGI account. you can get an account for free, and actually you don't have to use or to create yet another username and password. You can actually reuse the credentials that you use for your institutional account. And there are also options to use social media accounts. So first you get your checking account. Second, you need to request access to a virtual organization that we call notebooks.egI.eu. And the virtual organization is just a group of users and people, and you can only access EGI Replay if you belong to the group. So you need to request access. To do that, you just need to use your checking account and click on this enrollment URL. And on this, we normally at EGI, we normally do kind of a few checks to see that the request to join the group is legitimate. But after that check, people are allowed into the virtual organization so they can play around with EGI Replay. And finally, I also list here the official documentation from my binder and the documentation from EGI about EGI Replay. Now, how can you apply this to your own research software? So kind of the first requirement is you need to upload the code to a public repository. And for convenience, as you see, the integration is immediate with Jupyter Notebooks. So if you do this in a Jupyter Notebook or in a collection of Jupyter Notebooks, that's perfect. If not, it's also good, but you kind of miss some of the interactivity and mixture of figures and text and code that are allowed with Jupyter Notebooks. And after uploading the code, you also need to provide a way to identify and list the software dependencies for the code to run properly. As I mentioned, this is in our example for the Hickson 16 group case study, we use the environment.yaml file for conda dependencies. And again, you see on the right an example of how it looks like. But if you are using there are other options in my binder, depending on the programming language and the environment that you want to create. And finally, once you configure this, binder will offer you the link and the badge that you can paste on the repository for your experiments. As an added bonus, once you publish your code into GitHub, there is an easy way to synchronize GitHub with Zenodo. And this way, every time that you make a release on the GitHub repository, that's automatically synchronized with a release on Zenodo. And on Zenodo, you'll get a DOI, digital object identifier, to the specific version of the release, which we think is very nice because that's going to allow other people to cite the software that in the end is powering the paper, right? So that's a very, very nice addition as well. Okay, so let's also look at not only at the bright side, but also at the problematic side, because yeah, it's all amazing, but what are the problems, right? So I like to cover a little bit the issues that we found as well. So first, I'll focus on the amount of resources. The amount of CPU, the memory, and the time that you are allowed to use the service may be limited. And I'm comparing here again EGI Replay with my binder, where you get, for example, one user session. You cannot create more than one because that's limited. For each of the sessions that you get, for example, in EGI Replay, 4 CPU cores, 6 gigs of RAM, and there is no time limit, but the session is considered inactive if you haven't played around within 1 hour. And what it means is that after that inactivity period, everything is removed. And if you want to go back, you start from scratch. So that's a consideration to bear in mind. In my binder, instead, you get 1 CPU core, 2 gigs of RAM, and the time limit is for 6 hours. And inactivity is considered after no action is done after 10 minutes. The main difference as well between EGI Replay and my binder is that my binder is completely open, meaning that it doesn't need a user account to use it, Whereas for EGI Replay, we request to have an EGI check-in account. And this is mainly due to security concerns, the security issues that we faced in the past. And when the service was completely open, it was also abused. So with accounts, we kind of have a way to control that this doesn't happen again. The second aspect that I like to cover is that the way that you treat the software dependencies. In our example, it was the Conda environment. It might be tricky to get properly in terms of the list of dependencies, but also in terms of the versions for each of the dependencies. And moreover, in our case, the Hickson 16 study was completed in 2019. That's 5 years ago. And then back in 2019, the kind of the main Python version was 3.6, but that's now out of date. And with every new release of EGI Binder, the default environment comes with a supported version of Python. So in the meantime, we had to update the Conda environment to make it work still with this old Python 3 requirement that we have in the environment file. So that's a bit tricky, and that may be a little bit time consuming for you to maintain. I mean, to maintain this reproducibility. The other aspect that we found challenging was, for example, if you use as part of your analysis or the paper or the experiment, if you use interactive tools to process data, and there is no way to capture those kind of processing into a script or a code that can be rerun by others, then it's very difficult to achieve reproducibility in that case. And we actually faced that particular issue with a slicer Astro in this work. The other thing is that, for example, the input data for the Hickson 16 study is available through a website, but there needs to be a human going to the website, clicking many different options, and then getting a copy of the data. So there is no programmatic way to download the data. So in particular, what we did for this is to get this copy of the data and move it and rehost it somewhere else where we can basically download it with a machine. And that was suitable for us because the amount of input data was small, like in the order of a few gigabytes. But you can easily imagine that the bigger the data, the bigger the problem, basically, to move the data around, right? So that's another problem to consider. And then finally, with the licensing of data of software, you may have license to use it yourself, but others may not have the license to use or reuse the software or the data. So that's another aspect to consider. All in all, as you see, this is more targeted or low-hanging fruit for those experiments that are small. I mean, those that are using a small amount of resources to fit into the available allocation, right? And with open source or permissive licenses, let's say, and with a well-defined set of software requirements. And regarding the allocation or the the allocation of resources, I mean, we can increase a little bit the allocation per user, but also if you see in the notebooks, the idea is that you can interactively play around with the cells and move up and down. And so if the processing takes quite a lot to complete, it's also not very user-friendly. So again, it's not like you have performed a very huge simulation taking hours and then you can basically easily put it up there and reproduce it. Yeah, it's tricky. So not only in terms of allocation or computing resources, but also in the user experience reproducing the experiment. So that's why at least the Hickson system was a good fit because it kind of ticked all these boxes more or less. Right, so this is kind of how to do it and the issues. Is there any question before I move on to the example use of this by communities? Okay, I see no questions, so we'll finish early. communities that have already been using EGI Replay in the recent past, like last year. We have the environmental data science book, and what they offer in this link is a collection, a gallery of Jupyter Notebooks, reproducible notebooks in the earth science domain. So you can go to the gallery, click on the EGI Replay link, and rerun the study yourself and play around, as we showed earlier with the Higgs 16 study. But also we have the Reliance project. Reliance provided a platform called DrawHub to publish and share research objects. And inside that research object, you may have Jupyter Notebooks. So they collaborated with EGI to integrate DrawHub with EGI Replay. So if you upload research object with a Jupyter Notebook, you can then basically get a link automatically and rerun those notebooks using EGI Replay. So that's again offering easy support for reproducible science. Okay, and that's mostly it. The documentation for EGI Replay is in the slides that we'll share with you. Also, achieving reproducibility might be tricky, so we are here to help if you have problems. So there is also the link on how to contact us. And just to finish, I'd like to thank Mike Jones, who is the mind behind the Higgs 16 study and the one coming up with these nice ideas about providing a notebook per figure, for example. And also I'd like to thank Enol Fernandez, who is the mind after keeping EGI Replay healthy and alive, along with our cloud provider, SESNet. SESNet is actually the operator of the service. SESNet is one of the members of the EGI Federation, is a provider inside the EGI Federation. And finally, this is quite important as well, thanks to the great ecosystem out there with free services and open source software to make the study possible as well. So otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to achieve this. So from my point of view, that's everything. I think there are some questions coming now, so we can also view the Q&A now.